this computer. You can start.
Okay, yeah, we'll get started. Today's presentation is going to be about web design, specifically about Figma and Webflow. But to begin with, I want to start with a quote by Wayne Gretzky. I'm not a big hockey fan by no means, but I saw this quote on a very old Steve Jobs presentation when he was talking about Apple moving away from the floppy disk. And for some reason, I thought that's sort of relatable to Figma and Webflow, simply because in web design, for like 20, 25 years, there have been so many different tools. And Figma and Webflow, they kind of emerged over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years as almost industry standard. Figma more so in the design industry, and Webflow, I wouldn't say Webflow is industry standard for web design, but it's a very neat tool for website hosting and fast website building because you don't need any prior coding knowledge. So in today's presentation, I want to briefly, give you an intro about, what the heck is Figma, what is Webflow, and how you can use them to build great personal or also e-commerce websites. And then if we have, a little bit of time at the end, I was going to do a quick demo to see how you can migrate a design from Figma into Webflow and literally publish a website within 20 minutes. So maybe we can do that later if we have time. So to begin, though, I wanted to show that, by no means are Figma and Webflow unicorns in the industry. They're certainly great tools, but there's also other things you can use. For Figma, I would say the main competitors are Adobe XD, which you have to pay for through the normal Adobe subscription. Figma has a free account, but if you want to use most of the shareable features, which I'll outline later, you also have to pay. But there's also others. Mockflow is pretty prominent, and Sketch. I would say those are kind of the top 3. Webplan, just in mind, I haven't really used, but left pointed me to a good resource there. And then on the other hand, we have Webflow, which is that's kind of the website building tool. And there's many others like it that help you to develop websites with no code. There's Shopify, obviously, which has been grown pretty quickly over the last couple of years, due to the e-commerce hype that we've seen. There's WordPress, which has been around for decades. And Squarespace and Wix are sort of similar tools, but from my experience, not as good as Webflow. The next slide talks about what Webflow is. It's a very, very high level overview. I'll show you the Webflow editor, which that's the picture here on the right. I'll show you that in a second, how to actually edit stuff in Webflow, how to get to that editor, how to start everything. So that's a pretty neat tool. It looks fairly similar to Figma, as you'll see in a second, which makes migration easier. The main benefit of Webflow, obviously, is that you don't need any prior HTML, CSS, or JavaScript knowledge to develop your websites. Now, does it help to know a little bit of HTML or JavaScript or CSS to understand, why Webflow works the way it does? I would say yes, but you simply don't need it. You can create responsive web designs, so web designs that work across a variety of displays and devices in Webflow fairly easily. It still requires a bit of extra effort, but you can do it. And one of the cool things, I'll show you some Webflow sites in a second. You can create like extremely cool animations without any JavaScript. So that's kind of the biggest upside, I would say. Like, you don't need any JavaScript to create some super, super cool sites. And I'll show you them in a second. Again, here there's a short summary of the benefits. The main one here being in the middle, that it's so much faster and also more accurate. You catch bugs much easier in Webflow than typing everything out in an HTML site that's multiple thousand lines long. So Webflow certainly has its upsides there. You need no coding knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, so it's super cool in that regard. I never had any HTML and CSS background, and I picked up fairly quickly in Webflow. So it's super easy to learn. Well, it's easy to learn, but hard to master, I would say, because there's so many details you have to be aware of. But I'll get to that in a second. For now, I wanted to show you a few sites that have been built completely in Webflow. The first one being Webflow itself. So let me click on this and show you how the Webflow homepage looks like, which has been built entirely in Webflow. You can see I'm scrolling, but it's not scrolling, it's animating those things here, which is pretty cool. It's used by a lot of designers out there. So there is, if you learn Webflow, there is a demand for you, but you're not alone in the space. Yeah, you can see you can edit stuff fairly easily. I'll show you how to do that later. There's templates, you can use e-commerce stores. You can even have login pages these days. It's pretty new, so you can have people that sign up for your content, which is nice. And then there's a variety of other benefits, but I don't have the time to talk about all of them, unfortunately. But what I wanted to do is, let's go back to Figma. And I wanted to show you some crazy websites that have been built in Webflow. So the first one was fairly normal. So now this one will be a bit more spicy. This is also completely built in Webflow, no coding knowledge. I don't know what kind of website that is. It looks like a kind of some kind of event hosting thing, but I thought it was animated pretty wildly. I don't know if I would do it the same way, but it just kind of shows the power of, all those different animations you can do in Webflow without any coding. So I thought it's pretty cool. And then lastly, which one? Let's do this one because it shows that you can do e-commerce stores in Webflow pretty neatly. So this is some random almond shop, but you can, basically integrate a marketplace into Webflow, and I was able to, buy stuff. You can see the URL that's up there. If I go back to the homepage, you can see it's hosted in Webflow. So those are kind of the unique links you get from hosting in Webflow, but you can always modify them. So if you were to buy your own custom domain, let's say in Google Domains, you could use that as well, instead of the Webflow provided domain. Okay, let's go back.
Hold on, please. Your presentation is not PowerPoint, right?
No, I was gonna get that to a second.
Okay,
Get to
sorry.
that. Yeah. My presentation actually is done in Figma, and I'll show you how that looks in a second. Let's move forward. I'll just go big here. So one limitation though of Webflow is that you cannot do any web applications just of yet. The only one you can do is an e-commerce store, which is cool. But stuff like Facebook or Netflix or Airbnb, where you need more user input, you still need to write your own JavaScript and CSS. So Webflow, not the deal man yet for faster and advanced web applications. But maybe we'll come there. Who knows? But now I was going to switch gears a bit and head over to Figma and explain what Figma is and how you can use it. And like Lev had outlined a second ago, I've actually designed this entire presentation in Figma. So it's a pretty cool tool you can use to design a variety of things. So as you can see in this case, we have a similar canvas to Webflow. I have all my assets here on the left, and then I could go into, this slide here and change the text right away, and it will show up in the prototype that I've built. So it's cool for editing. Obviously, you can do slides, you can do other kinds of prototypes. If I were to, let's say, design an app for an Apple Watch, I could even do that here in Figma. So I can design a frame, and I can pick the size I'm designing for. So you can see, I can create one for an iPhone, a Surface, so tablets, MacBooks, slides. That's what I used for the presentation. Or you can use Apple Watches. So it will give you the size, and then depending on the real estate you're working with, you can input rectangles or or text and type along. So yeah, it's fairly flexible, and you know, it has a variety of use cases. So I really enjoy working with it. And you know, everything that so far I've wanted to design, I've been able to design with it. There also is a great community of people designing in Figma, so it gives you that that extra bonus of, okay, if you're ever stuck, you can, you know, ask people, and people have designed so many things. You can copy and fork and, you know, modify as you see fit. So I really love it. To be fair, I haven't really used any of the other competitors, but as I mentioned earlier, there's really, so far there hasn't been any need for me to switch to others. Maybe before I go into the demo, a little bit of background about Figma. So Figma was actually founded in 2012 by Dylan Field and Evan Wallace. I think both of them worked in the computer science industry and were at Brown at the time. Actually, I have the Wikipedia page open. Yeah, I think they were at Brown, and they wanted to design a company or a technology startup that will allow users to creatively express themselves online, which I think they've certainly accomplished that. They were also, I think they sold to Adobe last year to over 20 billion. I don't know if they've sold the entire stake, or just the majority, but that's a pretty big sum for an online design tool. I think their Series A funding was something like 14 million in 2015. So they went from 14 million to 20 billion in a matter of 7 years. So it's pretty crazy. The main, you know, buzzwords for Figma is basically it's a wireframing design tool. I kind of see it as a blueprint for websites. You can, you know, build your designs there and then export them over. There's different pricing tools, so depending on how many users you want to have and be able to edit with at the same time. So for example, in this file here, it's just a draft, so I can share it with you. If I were to copy the link, then you can see it. You cannot edit because it's just a draft. But if I wanted to make, you know, 50 people should be able to edit it, I would have to upgrade to a better plan to accommodate more users. Maybe one thing I wanted to point out was FigJam. So FigJam is similar to Mural. I don't know if you've worked with Mural before, but Mural is essentially this tool where you can do whiteboarding. So you have your whiteboard and you can basically put sticky notes on it, which I think that's the same thing as Figma. So Mural literally copied one tiny aspect of Figma. And so Figma was like, okay, well, we'll just do the same thing because we already do it anyways. So you can do that in Figma as well now. Oh yeah, this slide basically is a summary of what I've already said. I see Figma kind of like as the Google Doc for design. So you can collaborate with others in real time, and it's always available for you. So there's also a desktop version, which I'm working on right now, but you can also work out of the browser. I prefer the desktop usually, because Chrome tends to steal a lot of memory sometimes. So I find the desktop a bit better. One thing, again, I won't have time for today is Figma's component system. So those are similar to classes where you can, you know, create one object and then create a variety of components of it that are related to it. So for example, you can create a button, and that button can have a variety of different forms. You know, sometimes it's clicked, sometimes it's hovered over, and you can use that to then, you know, make a variety of different versions of the same thing in a very fast way. Yeah, so that's basically a quick intro to Figma. One thing that's sort of unrelated to Figma and Webflow, but it's certainly needed for design, are design principles. I have zero background in design, and I always was scared, you know, to do anything with design because I thought you have to be super creative or go to art school or whatever. But, you know, the more I've learned is that design actually follows, you know, a bunch of principles and guidelines and laws similar to, you know, mathematics or biology or physics. So if you follow those and if you use those principles correctly, then most of the time your end product will be good. Now it doesn't harm to be creative. And creative websites always stand out. But even the most creative websites that we've seen, they always follow certain principles and guidelines. And if I just mapped a couple of them out here, and you can see, how they kind of relate to design. Oh, sorry, I don't know what that was. There was, I guess, a Figma trick I just did, or maybe it's a bug. That was a bug. Okay. Okay, but that's basically it. I think I have one more slide. Yep, the typical workflow. So as a designer, you have 2 key steps. So you first design your stuff in Figma and then in Webflow. But before and after that, there's also things you want to do. So usually it starts with the kickoff. And then I usually get some inspiration in terms of, hey, well, if I were to design a website for, let's say, a ride-sharing app, like similar to Uber, I would get inspiration from, how does a website for a car manufacturer look like? How does a technology website look like? How does, Uber's website look like? What fonts do they use? How much white space there is, et cetera, et cetera. And I would then kind of build a mood board, which is a combination of different, screenshots and things I'd liked. And that mood board then helped me to design my stuff in Figma. And then once I've finished the homepage or a couple pages, I would get feedback from the client. And then, once the client's approved, I would go ahead and implement in Webflow. Firstly, I would implement it for the desktop, and then I would go ahead and implement it for tablet and smartphone, and then get the client sign off. And in today's demo, I actually want to show you how you can take a design from Figma that's been approved and implement it in Webflow. So I think that's it. So that's time for demo. So if I go, so the first thing you want to do is you want to navigate to your Webflow account. Now I've already created one here, which is my personal account. And you are in your dashboard. So I want to create a new site. So I click on that. Excuse me. And the first thing you see is that, when you create a new site, there's so many different things you can choose from. You can create templates. There's free templates. There's e-commerce templates, which you have to pay for. Agency templates, different pricing points, restaurant templates. So depending on the category you're looking for, most likely there's a good template for it. So I recommend, if you really want to stand up a website super quickly, buy a template, tweak, the headlines or the content, and then you can literally have your website standing in less than 2 hours. But in our case, we want to, let's go back to Figma. Where is it? Shoot. There it is. We want to grab this website here. I've designed that prior to the seminar here. It's just a homepage, and we want to get this into Webflow somehow. It's probably too small, so let me go into here and show you how it looks like. So that's how it looks like. It has a stupid grid on, which I'll turn off. But yeah, let's try to maybe get the main section here, because all 4 sections together will be a bit lengthy in terms of effort, but I think we have enough time. Yeah, 18 minutes to get the main section into Webflow, and it will also teach a bit of, how does the actual system look like. Okay, so let's create a blank site, and we can give it a name. We call it data seminar, and it creates the site. So it's very quick under the hood. For those of you interested, Webflow runs on Amazon CloudFront. So that's what powers Webflow. So now we are in the main editor, and as you can see, it's white, mostly white. There's different breakpoints here. So desktop, tablet, phone, or landscape, and then portrait and phone. On the left side here, you have your main menu. You can add elements. There's different elements, and we'll play around with a couple of them in a second. There's components. Those link basically one-to-one to Figma, which is cool. So you can import your components from Figma directly into Webflow. there's this navigator thing, which that's kind of the main structure of your website. So this relates to HTML, how the way HTML is structured, and it's pretty cool. I'll show you in a second how that looks like in terms of code. You can also see the way the project looks from a direct code perspective in this way here. So right now, this is basically the entire HTML script. We haven't done any styling yet, so there's no CSS available, and JavaScript is pretty much empty as well. But you could, if you wanted to, and you've paid for the plan, you could upgrade the plan and then export, the HTML code, CSS code, and JS code, hand it over to your developer, and they could implement it on a live website that's not hosted on Webflow. So that's pretty neat. You have your pages, so I can add, a new page and call it landing page. Create, and now you can see we have 2 pages, home page and landing page, and they look identical because I haven't messed with any of them. We also have CMS, which stands for Content Management System. So you can imagine that there's many websites that have blogs, but oftentimes, the people that write the blogs, they aren't really familiar with the underlying website development techniques. So what you want to avoid is them having go into the system and change the actual code properties just so they can change the text. And Webflow has made it very easy for content developers to go in and just literally change the content without messing with the entire website. There is this thing called Webflow University, which I can definitely recommend. They have a ton of videos, and they're actually pretty hilarious in terms of how they structure them. And this guy here is pretty funny. So they explain it in a pretty cool way, and it makes learning fun. So I really enjoyed watching them. Seriously, it's cool. And then users, I really haven't messed with. I think this is for websites where you want people to log in. So I would have to do some research to give you more updates on that. But yeah, I haven't really used it so far. E-commerce, so you can turn your website into a store, and then you can see all your assets, so like all the logos or images you've used on the website. And there's a settings tab. But for now, what we want to do is we want to go back to Figma and somehow try to replicate this top section here in Webflow. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add a section, which section basically, come on, I want to hover over this question mark here. Usually it gives you an explanation. Oh yeah, that's just a development block that extends across the full width of the browser window. So sounds like that's what we need. And as you can see, it has added the section here to the top. It looks, if we go to here, you can't really see it, which that's the preview button if you've wondered. So what we can do though is we can select it in the navigator. Now we've selected the body, which is the entire thing, or we can just select the section. We can also select it within the editor here. So select the body or select the section. We can give it a color. So if I give it a color of red, nothing happens. So that's a bit strange. Like, why didn't it happen? It's because I actually grabbed the wrong color. So I changed typography, but I wanted to change the background color. So if I do this, now it's red. So if we go to top view, it's still not there. This is because there's no content within the section here. So we need to add something. So I think now we have a div block, and if we were to add a heading inside the div block and just call it hello world. And we now go to the preview, you can see the section is red. So it works, but obviously that's not what we want. So I'm going to delete this div block, and I'm also going to change the color for the background. So I'm going to grab the color actually directly from Figma, which you can do. So I have this demo frame here selected. And now I'm going to hover over this rectangle here, and I can grab the color directly from it. And I can say, hey, okay, change the color to whatever we just had, and it does it. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that all the content is aligned across the entire screen. So how the heck do we do that? So the first thing we want to do is we can change the height of the section. So as you can see here in this design tab here on the right, we can mess with the size of the section. So we can say, you know, the max width is 50 pixel. Then it will be very short. And if I hit Command Z, it goes back. So what we want to do is we don't want to change the width, we want to change the height. So I can say, you know, now it's probably like 100 pixels. Let's go to 200. It actually doesn't change anything. So what if I go to 500? It still doesn't change anything because I was editing the body. So I have to go back here. And if I go to 500 now, it will change it. We could hard code it. So we could say, okay, hey, it's probably 1200 pixels, something like that. Maybe even a little bit less. Let's make the screen, you know, that color for this size. This is not good though, because if we were to increase the pixel size, ergo looking at a larger screen, it doesn't work anymore. So instead, what we want to do is we want to use a dynamic value, which you can use by changing the units here. So right now we have pixels, but we can use something called the viewport height. So this is this VH unit here, and we can set it to 100, meaning make this section 100% of the viewport height. So if we were to 50, it gives you half the height. And this is then nice because if I were to shrink the browser, which I actually can manually do here. Oh, that's shrinking Figma. Sorry, I was meant to the browser. Give me 1 second. You can see that, you know, it manually adjusts, which is nice. So that's exactly what we want. And we can set it to 100. So now how does the page look? Okay, we have a section, a body. We want to put a container actually now in the section to make sure that our content is aligned properly. So if we go back to Figma, you can see that if I turn on this layout grid, it kind of changed it. So I had this design layout grid that I used to make sure everything looks properly. And I think I had 140 margins. Yeah. We want to make sure that all the content lives within this space here. So we have to measure the width of you know, the screen here, which we can do with the rectangle. I have to keep the time in mind. We got 9 minutes, which I think we can do. So this rectangle is 11,060 pixels wide. So I can go here, go into my container. I'm going to name it container, which essentially what I'm doing under the hood is I'm creating a class called container. And I'm setting the max width for this container to 1160. So now, as you can see, it's 1160, but it's not formatted properly. So I want to change the margins, which that's basically controlling, you know, what is the padding on each side and how does it behave related to other elements. I'll change it to 1900. Another thing I don't like right now is that it's at the top. So what we can do about this is we can go to the section and we can add some margin here or some padding. So in this case, we want to add padding. Again, we could hard code it and, you know, add pixel values. I usually prefer to do it in a dynamic way. So again, we're gonna do viewport height, 15% of the viewport height for the top heading. And if I go to the section, we're going to do the same thing here. Viewport height. And we're also going to add some margins. 60 pixels should be fine. For the side, I think it's fine because it's going to change automatically with the auto margins. So as you can see now, if I change the browser, it kind of adapts nicely, which is cool. Now within this container, going back to Figma, we want to have kind of this 2-column structure of content on the left, picture on the right. So how do we do that? You can either do columns or you can do something called a flexbox. I usually prefer flexboxes because columns are very rigid and you can build columns with your own flexbox. Plus you can do other things with it. So I usually prefer a flexbox. So I'm going to show it to you that way. So we're going to create a new class called flexbox. And within this flex box, we have to enable the flex layout, which we'll do by clicking this. And now we can add different containers into our flex box. So I'll do this really quick to save time. Now we can change the alignment of these boxes. And in our case, we want to do this alignment because it pushes the content to the side, and we utilize all the space. So now what we can do in each of these, blocks that we have, we can add the actual content. So we can add a heading, we can add a paragraph, we can add 2 buttons. And then here on the right, we'll add an image. Now notice that the heading is white. This is because I've messed around with it earlier. And I've had a heading on the body, which I've changed the color with. So you can see in this case here, it's inheriting it from the section actually. So I don't want this. So what I could do is I could change it here, or most likely, yeah, I'll go back to the section and just change the color to black because I don't like this. Well, I'll actually change it to white. So that's what we had in the other one as well. I'll also need to import an image, which I can, grab from Figma. I've grouped all the objects together, and now I can export it. I can export it in PNG, JPEG, SVG, or PDF. In this case, let's export it as a PNG, and I've already done that. So to save some time, I can just import it from my downloads, which you see that's the same picture. And it's getting it. I can change here, images, I think it means high quality. I actually don't know what it means. But it looks okay. But for now, we want to make this picture bigger, which we can do by decreasing the size of this block here. So you can see this block takes up a lot of space, so the picture doesn't grow. So what we can do is we can give it a max width, let's say 400. Okay, so that already looks much better. Let's click on the flex box. Let's align it vertically. And now let's quickly grab the values from here. Or I should say the actual text. Have your best chat, and then the other one. How are we doing on time? Oh, we got, if we're lucky, we're gonna make it. We got 3 minutes.
Don't worry about time.
Okay. So now I'm just changing the content here, and then I'm gonna edit all the elements after. Try it free, and then get a demo. Okay, so this is it in terms of content. Now we want to style the elements. So as you can see, we can style the element here by typography. So we can actually grab the values directly from Figma. If I go here, you can kind of see the similarities in terms of icons and the fields that are available. So you can see that in this case, I used a font called Mulish in semi-bold with 81 pixels. That's the line height here and the letter spacing. So what I can do is I can use the same values in Webflow. So I can highlight this. Mulish isn't there yet, which is weird, but I can add it since the Google font. And that adding is super easy with Webflow. I can add any Google font I want, and I can also add any Adobe fonts I've paid for. So I can simply look for Mulish, and I'm going to select all the varieties except for the italic ones because I don't care about those. And now they've added it. I can go here. You notice that they don't show up yet. I need to refresh the site, and then they're there. So also notice that I haven't clicked save anywhere, and I reload the page and it's still all there. So it saves stuff automatically for you, which is nice. So whenever your computer crashes, Webflow is still there. So I have Mulish now, and I want to change it to semi-bold with a height of, actually let's do 75, I think 81. Oh, sorry, that was the height for the line height. Change this. And line height, I usually like to use percentage values. Okay, and then we'll use the same font here. actually, usually it's a good practice to not use the same font between your header and your website text, because it creates a separation. But in this case, we'll just do it that way because that's what I had on the design. I think I had 21. No, what did I have in Figma for this? 20. Okay, Mulish 20 regular. So we can do normal, I guess, and size 20. Let's make it a bit smaller. Okay, and then let's decrease it to light. And I can also change the opacity here. So if I make it 80, it won't really fight for, the attention with the heading. So the next thing we need to change is the buttons. So for the buttons, we can change the spacing here, which I think I used 15 top and bottom padding last time. So if we change those, you can see it adds more spacing to it. I want to do the same on the side. Okay, cool. And now I want to change the color of the background because I think it was white. So we'll do white. And then typography, we want black. Okay, so that looks better. Now the only thing we change is make corners round. No, it's round. So we can name it, we can give it a class called button. So now we can go here and we can apply the button class, and it will do all these changes for us, which is nice. But in Figma, this actually was a ghost button, so it didn't have a background, so we need to change it. But I can't change it here because if I were to change this in this one, it will also change the other one. So I have to give it a new class. So I can call it ghost. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the background transparent. But I'm going to give it a border with white style. Why did not do that? Oh, there we go. Okay, and then I make the text white. That should be pretty cool. And then we can grab the separation between those two elements from Figma. If I hit the Option button or the Alt button on Windows, I see it's 22. So I can just go here and add a 22 margin, which will give you the same. Now I'm going to do the same for the margin between the heading and the text, as well as the text and the buttons. So if we go back to Figma, we can see this is a 30 margin and a 62 pixel margin. So now if we add those back to here, we give it a 30 margin. Was it 32? I think it was 32. Oh no, it was 30. 62 at the bottom. 30 and then a 62 margin. You can see it almost looks like it. I want to give it one more check. It looks like, how aligned is it? So I want to make sure that we are aligned properly. It's almost okay, like this. I think we have to push this entire container a little bit higher, which we can do by changing the alignment. So yeah, that's pretty much identical to what we have. And we can also check how responsive it is. So what happens if we shrink it, if we extend it, it looks fine. One thing I'll point out though, that this design obviously doesn't work on, might work on tablet. I would have to decrease, some fonts here. But the next thing you want to do is obviously make sure that it works properly on all devices, which it doesn't work on landscape or phone modes yet. So there's ways to trick around with this. But since we're over time, I'm going to leave it at this spot here. Maybe one more thing we can do is we'll add a navbar. This only takes one click. So we'll add a navbar into, you see how the navbar is within the container now, or within the section, so it doesn't stretch to the outside of the screen. But if we put it to the top, it's there. So now we could do the same thing we did earlier. Make sure we use the same values for the navbar, input the logo to make sure it looks the same as it does here. But I think I'm going to call it a day here and open the floor for any questions or any input. And I hope you guys learned something.
Wow.
Thank you. It was amazing.
I think, yeah. 30 minutes website is done.
Yeah.
Great. Nice
Yeah.
tool.
Right. Malte, so you have to do separate adjustments for all screen sizes, and then
Yes. Yes.
it is saved as one file, right?
It's saved as one file. Yes. If I were to go to the code right now, which you can see that all the changes are here, and then the different screen sizes are also saved within the one file. So this is all the CSS and the JavaScript and the assets. Yeah. So it's one file, even though it's different screen sizes.
Right. And then what do you do with it? You publish it? Like how you make it available?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. We actually haven't published it yet. So we built this thing now, so now we can publish it, which takes a second. Dataseminar.webflow. We'll publish it, and then we can visit the site. So I can go here, and the website's ready. Yeah. And then, so that's, and then you can literally, I can copy it, and I can go to it. And yeah, so it's so fast.
Yeah. It's live.
So, Malte, can you do it any quicker than that? It'll take 30 minutes every time.
Yeah,
I'm just picking.
that's funny. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I love this thing, so it's cool. I could have done it in 5 minutes if I were to just buy a template.
Okay.
I'm guessing there must be some kind of Webflow competition on how fast you can
I got you.
stand up a website. Maybe we can have a competition one day. And
Very impressive, Malte.
Yeah.
Great work. I was just giving you a hard time.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll stop the recording.
Okay, I'll stop sharing here.